I always see myself as an artist who chose to use a camera to make his art practice. I never have regarded myself as a photographer, but rather as an artist using a camera. My name is Andres Serrano, and I'm an artist born in New York City. Been in New York City all my life. I'm a real New Yorker. My mother was also born in America. She was born in Key West, Florida, but she grew up in Cuba. And so when she came back to the U.S., she only spoke Spanish. So I learned Spanish at home. I was an only child. And my father had left us when I was very young. And so when I was about 7 years old, my family moved to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which was very Italian at the time. Even though my mother was raised in Cuba, I've always had a problem with people calling her Cuban, because she was born in America. So that means she was an American, but just raised in Cuba. And I remember, I believe it was fifth grade, fifth grade, the teacher was calling all the kids one by one and asking them their nationality. And so when it was my turn, I went up to the teacher and he said, what's your nationality? And I said, I'm an American. He said, no, but where are your parents from? And I said, well, my father was from Honduras, and my mother was born in Key West, but was raised in Cuba. So he just said, Cuban. He said loudly, Cuban. And he checked off the box, like Cuban. That's what, he wanted to put down. At the time, there was an Italian kid named Thomas Dodona who heard the word Cuban. And ever since then, he started teasing me, calling me either Cuban or Castro. Now, this was 1962, so the words Cuba and Castro were very dreaded words for a guy like me who wanted to keep a low profile. For him to be calling me this, it was always a constant source of irritation for me. There was a stigma involved with that. Oddly enough, 60 years later, there's still a stigma involved with Cuba. And, I can't say I'm surprised, but it bothers me. It bothers me that long after Cuba, long after the revolution, long after Castro is dead, that Cuba is still vilified by certain people in this country, and that the U.S. still has these horrible policies with the boycott against Cuba. Cuba is not a threat to anybody. But what I see is this. I see that Cuba has no money. Cuba has no power. Cuba has no oil. And therefore, it's easy to victimize Cuba, You don't do it to Saudi Arabia because they got oil and they got money and they got power. So you pick on Cuba instead. My mother, like most people, was not interested in art. So I picked up art and many other things on my own, reading. And so I started going to school at the age of about 11, 12 years old. Started going to, not school, Metropolitan Museum of Art. I started going to museums on my own. I remember that, first of all, a lot of the paintings that I saw as a kid in the 60s, early 60s, at the Met, are still there, at the Met, they're still there. And at the time, I also remember that the most expensive painting in the world was Rembrandt's Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer, and it was valued at $2.5 million. Art spoke to me because it seemed easy. Early on in my career, when I say early on, when I was 15 or 16, I discovered the work of Marcel Duchamp, and I feel like Duchamp taught me everything I need to know about art. I dropped out of high school, And 2 years later, I went to art school. I went to the Brooklyn Museum Art School when I was 17. I studied painting and sculpture for 2 years at the Brooklyn Museum Art School. But after art school, I realized I really couldn't paint. I didn't try to paint. Also, I was young. I was 19 at that time, 18, 19. So I didn't have a studio. But I lived with a girl named Millie Ehrlich, and Millie had a camera. So I took Millie's camera and I started taking pictures with it, but always seeing myself as an artist who chose to use a camera to make his art practice. I never have regarded myself as a photographer, but rather as an artist using a camera. When I was in art school, I knew nothing about the art world. Me and the people that were students at the school, my fellow students, some of them were older. I was probably one of the younger ones. I was 17, 18. I remember there was even an older lady in her 60s. Nobody talked about the art world. Nobody went to galleries. We didn't know what the art world was. And so basically I was just having fun making art, and this was the 60s. So after school, me and my friends would go to the Botanical Garden, the Brooklyn Botanical Garden right next door, and smoke pot, But we knew nothing about the art world. And then after art school, I took a detour, from art and went through a world of drug addiction, selling drugs, living in the East Village. And so it's only when I pull out of that life. By now, I'm in my 20s, pushing 30. I'm 28 years old, because I led a drug life from 21 to 28. So at the age of 28, now I feel like something told me it's time for you to leave this life behind, because if you continue in this way until you're 30, you're not going to become the artist you want to be. So then I had to wean myself off of the methadone program. That was the last drug that I was on. Finally, when I got off it, though, for a long time I didn't do anything. I didn't see anybody. I had to leave all my friends behind because, it's funny because the people that I was around when I was in the Lower East Side taking and selling drugs, even though I was with them, I always felt, I'm with you, but I'm not like you. There was always a sense of separation, meaning I'm just passing through. And I've had this sense of passing through all my life, even as an artist. And so, but when I finally decided to venture out into the world slowly, actually I met a woman in 1979 named Julie Ault. And Julie and I got married eventually. We started living together soon after we met. But Julie was involved with a group called Group Material. Group Material was an organization of artists that had just formed. Julie and Tim Rollins had been the founders of the group. And they were artists who were doing socially political installations. They actually used not only artwork, but products like a TV or different products. And they addressed issues such as consumerism, politics in El Salvador, or AIDS. So they were, along with ACT UP, a very active art group. They were not specifically, in the movement of AIDS, but they did do a show of AIDS, about AIDS. And I remember early on, Julie met Felix Gonzalez-Torres, and she, I don't say that Julie discovered Felix, but she had she saw right away that Felix was something else, and she invited him to join Group Material. So that's how I first met Felix, through Group Material. And, Julie and I, we had separate things. her thing was group material, even though they, you know, occasionally asked me to be part of the exhibition with something of mine. I never attended the meetings. I was never a member of group material. But, you know, at the same time that Julie was doing her thing with group material, I started to do my thing as an artist. So that's when I started to make work myself in 81, 82.